Góðan daginn. Þessi viðburður verður allir á ensku hérna í frá, þannig þetta eru síðustu orðin sem ég segi á íslensku í bili. Good morning. I just had to explain to my Icelandic fellows that I will not be speaking in Icelandic. Well, we're on time, and I would like to welcome you to this event, which is co-organized by the European Digital Innovation Hub in Iceland, EDIH for short, the City of Reykjavik, and the Impulse project, which is a European project that the city has been involved in for almost 3 years now. Now, the director of the EDIH Iceland is going to say a few words of welcome in a minute, Sverrir Geirdal. But I will have the honor of introducing our speakers. First, we have Conor Fitzmaurice from DG Connect in Brussels. And then we have Þorsteinn Árnason from our Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs. Now, you're a legal advisor, Þorsteinn, and Conor, you're a policy officer, right? And thereafter, Alicia Jimenez, who is a coordinator of the Impulse project. She's going to tell us about the project in this wider context of the developments, the technical developments it is all about. And the fourth speaker is Óskar Sandholt, who is the director of our Department of Services and Innovation here in Reykjavik. Now, we have 6 panelists, and as one of our city councillors and chair of the Digital Council, Alexandra Bream, she will take over once the talks are finished and introduce the panel, and we'll have hopefully lively panel discussions. Just a couple of words on Reykjavik partnering with the Impulse project. When I was introduced to the project, it was already here. And I guess for me, taking over the partnership, Reykjavik's partnership in the project, perhaps the first question hitting me with a sort of a pair of fresh eyes, I guess, was why? Why would the city council or the city government or the services here be concerned with the development of authentication protocols to access those same services? And the reason I'm asking that question has to do with the ways in which electronic identities have evolved in Iceland in a federated model, which is regulated and governed by our Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs. But perhaps because of that question, what became important for our partnership with the Impulse project is to map this ecology here in Iceland and share that with our partners. And what, of course, we learn is that in other countries, people do things differently, or they do them similarly. They can do them in all sorts of ways. And it just brings home that technological development or particular trajectories of development are never inevitable, but they're always questionable, always can be opened up for debate, for reasoning. And that's why we're here today. So this is about learning something, but also about discussion. So I hope we have a good discussion today. And Sverrir, you're next. Come up here and welcome.
Of course, I had to have my own computer, just to be different. And it will come on the screen, I promise. In the meantime, I am Sverrir Geirdal. I am director of European Digital Innovation Hub, and I'm honored to be a part of this event. And I think it was a good idea when Kristrún mentioned this, that we should have a CoLab or a collaboration on this topic. I wanted to introduce European Digital Innovation Hub. What is it? Yep, there it is. Nice. That's the only thing that matters. I just wanted to sort of briefly go over what is European Digital Innovation Hub, what have we done, and what do we plan to do. We are a cooperation of these players, which are the two biggest universities in Iceland. Rannís, which is the National Research Center, Origo, which is an IT company, and Syndis, which is really good in cybersecurity. What do we do? With our partners, we offer help or tools and knowledge about artificial intelligence. We give access to high-performance computers with both universities and our partners in Europe. We give test before invest environment, which I think is a good thing and could be used by Reykjavik, for example, and consultation. Business development on the use of artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence is a wide range of services, of course, and we need to think about cybersecurity and computer power, which is high-performance computers, and intellectual property. That is really important so that we can actually create some value while doing this. And we do it by facilitating better education, building awareness, and building skills in the country. We need to be better at, for example, cybersecurity, and also open the window through the grant system in Europe. And last but not least, create a community for the artificial intelligence players in Iceland. What is done? In the beginning, I would like to boast a little bit, because since we started, we have been part of programs or projects that have secured 1 billion Icelandic kronas in grants. We have been in existence for a little over a year, so I think this is actually a fantastic achievement for the Icelandic environment. And what have we done? We have started the master's program in cybersecurity with both universities, which is also a groundbreaking thing. We sort of facilitated both universities, both big universities in Iceland, to cooperate and provide a master's program in cybersecurity that is will start this fall. Also, a master's program in artificial intelligence, which is provided by the Reykjavik University. The National Cooperation Center for Cybersecurity, we just signed the contract with the EU yesterday. So this will start either 1st of October or 1st of November. Defend Iceland, which is a project that Syndis is heading and uses Iceland as a testbed, which is really what we offer in European Digital Innovation Hub to the rest of Europe. And we have designed and implemented the service framework for the SMEs and public bodies so that they can use test before invest. We've also done these kind of events, CoLab, we call them CoLabs, CoLab 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is the fourth one, where we talk about various topics that are connected to what we do: artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, policy making, how to use artificial intelligence, what are the pitfalls, and now access to services. And there is a CoLab number 5 is planned for October with the National Cooperation Center for Cybersecurity. October is a cybersecurity month, and we plan on opening the center, or the National Cooperation Center, and talk about cybersecurity. What next? We're going to create a website. We have a website, but we're going to do it better. We're going to publication of courses for the public in artificial intelligence and cybersecurity, and the NCC kickoff. We are a part of a 227 hub network in Europe. So this is a network that the European Union set up to facilitate better use of artificial intelligence in the continent. So we can reach out to all of them. We are, of course, a member of the Nordic consortium of EDIHs, also in the public body working group, and islands. Because I think when I was offered the opportunity to join the island group, which is Malta, Mallorca, Canary Island, I said yes. They, for some reason, they offered it to us because they want to also come here at some point. The offering for Europe, we are, of course, the Icelandic hub, so there is only one in Iceland. In Germany, there are multiple, as you can imagine. In Denmark, there are 4. In Finland, 4. In Iceland, only 1. And each hub has to have a geographical sort of thing, and also something to offer the other hubs. And what we offer is Iceland as a test bed, which is, of course, an old idea, but we can sense that there is an interest in our fellow EDIHs on using Iceland in that purpose. Our offering for the public bodies, because I think is the test before invest, where we sort of introduce SMEs or ideas or entrepreneurs to the data owners, which at least in Iceland, the Icelandic context, are public bodies. We offer desk in Gróska, we're located there, access to our partners, of course, access to knowledge, tools, access to processing power via the High Performance Computing Center in Háskóli Íslands. And we think we can offer a sandbox environment so that the public bodies can play around with things that might be sensible to do, but we don't know. So where we sort of combine SMEs, entrepreneurship, and the data owners, which are public bodies, to create something that we can play around in and figure out, does it make sense before we actually do it. We see ourselves like this. We are in the center, of course, like every project, we think we are in the center, and the most important thing in this side of the ocean. On one hand, we have ideas, projects, entrepreneurs, and SMEs. On the other, we have data owners or public bodies. We are in the center and trying to connect everything via these tools, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and high-performance computers. With Europe, and you can see the European map, which is, I thought it was interesting, because there is one country missing. Because when they sort of opted out of the European Union, they evaporated. So in a European context, the UK doesn't exist. And then, of course, there's euros down there, which is a driving force for everything. Thanks.
Well, I'm going to welcome our first speaker today, Conor Fitzmaurice, Policy Officer for Directorate General Connect.
Thank you.
I'll time you, I'm 5 and 1.
Okay. Yes. Just a bit. Okay. Perfect. Will they come up on the screen in a sec? We'll just wait a moment. Maybe we're just waiting. I'll just introduce myself. So as I said, I'm Conor Fitzmaurice. I'm a policy officer in DG Connect, where I work in the e-government and trust unit. And specifically what I work on, here we go, is the European Digital Identity Wallet, which is what I'm going to present today. So I'm going to present you both kind of the vision for the European Digital Identity Wallet, as it's a very important project that's looking to change basically how the eID space in Europe. So I'm going to present you a bit about that, which covers the kind of regulation, but also kind of the goals in mind. And then I'm going to maybe present you the work strands. There's a couple of work strands that are ongoing, both technical and essentially legal. So I want to give you an overview of that context. So maybe to just kick it off, I'll get into the vision side of things. So first of all, there's kind of a goal for the whole digital eID space in Europe, which is set in the Digital Decade Goals. So essentially with the current commission, essentially a number of goals were set in the digital space. And one which was set specifically to around eID was essentially that 100% of union citizens would have access to a secure electronic identification means that it's recognized throughout the union by 2030. And essentially this would allow them to have full control of their identity transactions and personal data. So that's kind of a goal. It's a very ambitious goal for the end of this decade. So with this kind of goal in mind, there's a number of, breaking it down a bit, there's kind of a number of sub-goals. First is that it should be free to be used by all citizens. So basically citizens should have access to secure eID means from their member states. And they can choose to use this on a voluntary basis. So they're not obliged to use essentially the eID means, but they should have access to one. Next, it should be accepted throughout Europe. So there should be an obligation around essentially private and public service providers to essentially accept these eID means essentially for anything that requires authentication. And finally, it should be secure and privacy orientated. So essentially, it's to give greater control to citizens around their personal data. So they should have control of their data, their identity, who they share it with, and essentially where it's stored. So maybe before I kick into the European Digital Identity Wallet, I'll maybe give you the vision rather than the functions. So basically with the Digital Decade Goal in mind, the EU basically launched a project or initiative back in 2020 called the European Digital Identity Framework. And essentially under this framework, there was a key goal around developing what is called a European Digital Identity Wallet kind of ecosystem. And with this, there's a number of both legal and technical components. So there's actually a revision of an EIS regulation, and I'll get into that in a little bit more detail shortly. But there's also the design of essentially this kind of wallet that could be used across member states. So essentially, and it would have some common functionality that could be leveraged. This is obviously looking at kind of the movement that's taking place in the eID space, where people are mostly interacting with public services via their mobile phones. And essentially, that's where the majority of engagement takes place. And there's growing use of kind of mobile wallets in general. So essentially, the goal for the European Digital Identity Wallet is to have three sets of functionality. First is kind of the identification and authentication. So the idea is that it can disclose basically identity data required for accessing public and private services. Next, it can kind of store and present what is called attestation of attributes. So the idea that you could have an attestation that of your, let's say, educational qualifications or your driving license, and that's all stored in this wallet and can be presented from it to essentially a service provider or company that is requiring it. And finally, the third functionality would be able to enable you to sign using what's called a qualified electronics signature. But that would enable you to sign documents, sign contracts in a manner that's both technically but also legally essentially verifiable. So the idea being that that grounds it in quite a strong legal basis. So with this kind of vision in mind, there's a number of key use cases that are being explored for essentially the European Digital Identity Wallet. You can see kind of a snapshot of them here, and I'll get into a little bit more detail. But essentially, this is not only the use cases, this is kind of let's say, higher priority ones that are currently included in essentially the large-scale pilots that the Commission is funding to essentially test the European Digital Identity Wallet. But you can kind of get a good overview of the breadth of the use cases that would come in, that would be covered by this wallet. So it's access to government services, you have mobile driving license, and then you have a lot of specific sectors, so education, health, travel, social security, and a couple of others. Payments is a big one on the bottom row. Essentially, the benefits seen for essentially a European citizen is to provide easier access to public and private services for them. It enables them to sign documents and essentially protect their personal data. Something I'll touch upon a little bit later, but essentially the data will be stored locally on someone's device. So that's in a secure environment on their phone, but essentially they have control of their data and it's stored in the person's control, and essentially no one else can really access it. For governments, it's improved access to digital services. Obviously, if you have 100% of your EU citizens with access to a digital eID means, then you can enable greater digitization. By essentially unifying this or kind of agreeing a common set of standards and specifications across Europe, you can enhance fraud protection and essentially agree a lot of principles or benefit from economies of scale. Lessons learned by one member state and another. So there's a lot gained from working together on this. And then for relying parties, they can essentially rely on the wallet with kind of a guarantee of essentially the person's identity. It provides them a kind of a single target that they can kind of integrate with, essentially. They don't have not each member state will have, let's say, a different digital eID means integration, but they'll be able to target the wallet because they'll have common interfaces. And then essentially for society, there's a couple of goals. These are kind of more out there, but it's basically tied to kind of the benefits previously mentioned. So more transactions can be conducted online. You can kind of focus resources better. And then there's also new opportunities from increased digitization. So I kind of touched on the technical standards, but to give you an idea of how this will work. So essentially, the Commission in 2020 proposed a revision to what was the EDIH regulation from 2016. And essentially, in this proposal, which is currently under negotiations with the European Parliament as well as the EU Council, there was an obligation on essentially member states to issue at least one European digital identity wallet. So it's not something that's just issued by the Commission. The Commission is still at a member state level. However, rather than having, let's say, a very fragmented space across Europe, essentially there's work ongoing looking at the identity standards and guidelines that exist right now to essentially agree kind of a standard technical framework that would exist for those wallets. So essentially each member state would issue a wallet, but it would be in line with these technical specifications, and that would ensure interoperability across Europe. And it would provide for kind of easier scalability, and it has a lot of benefits overall. So that's kind of an idea of the vision for the European Digital Identity Wallet as it was set out. Maybe to give you an idea of the technical processes that are the different development strands that are ongoing, as there's quite a number. We have both legal and technical work ongoing, which I'll maybe kick into. So yeah, I've touched on some of this already, but to essentially support the European Digital Identity Wallet and the whole ecosystem that's aimed to be created, there's 4 main work strands. But there's actually a couple of others outside of them, but these are the 4 I'll go into today. One is essentially legislation, so there needs to be legislation to underpin this. So right now that is a revision of the existing EIDAS regulation, which is from 2016. So essentially there was an impact assessment of that done in 2018, and there was a lot of lessons learned. Essentially EIDAS back in 2016 hadn't quite achieved its goals. Only 14% of public services were actually accessible cross-border using EIDAS notified eID scheme. So with that in mind, and with with the changing eID environment, there was this goal for a new regulation that would essentially underpin a European digital identity wallet. So that's currently ongoing. Next, we have the wallet technical specifications, which is essentially where representatives of member states as well as the Commission work together on a common toolbox consisting of essentially an architecture and reference framework, which is kind of an architecture document for how the European Digital Identity Wallet will work. This includes common standards, specifications, guidelines, and essentially best practices for the wallet. Next, we would have the large-scale pilots. So currently under the Digital Europe program, the Commission is funding a number of large-scale pilots around use cases, which I kind of showed earlier. And this is to essentially test the use of the European Digital Identity Wallet around these use cases and provide very useful feedback that is fed back to the ongoing technical specification work. So kind of a feedback loop, if you get. Then finally, we have the wallet reference implementation. So the Commission is currently procuring essentially a prototype or a reference implementation of the European Digital Identity Wallet based on the technical specifications agreed by the Member States and the Commission. And again, this is to kind of create a feedback loop where essentially through developing and actually trying to implement what is in the technical specifications, you pick up lessons and you can feedback what's possible, what isn't possible back to the technical specifications, and it creates a good flow. It's also to provide essentially an onboarding point for essentially member states or even the large-scale pilots that don't necessarily want to develop their own wallet. It's free to a member state to just follow the technical specifications and develop a European Digital Identity Wallet that's compatible with them, but they could also just take the code that will be made available by the Commission. So I can give you a kind of overview of the milestones where this work is ongoing. It's essentially been ongoing since 2020 in earnest, but really there's been a lot of developments, particularly in 2021 and 22, and even this year. So first on the legislative side, so that is still an ongoing, and the negotiations are still ongoing there. There was a provisional political agreement on the 29th of July. The revised regulation is expected to be adopted by essentially end of this year. And essentially what would follow from then is implementing acts to essentially implement, which would link to kind of the technical standards that are needed to the wallet. And essentially there's in the legislation, there will be set a 2-year period or approximate for essentially member states to issue a European Digital Identity Wallet. We have essentially the technical specifications, which are ongoing. So basically there's the architecture and reference framework, which is essentially agreed by the member state representatives in the EDIH expert group. The latest version is from April, but it's regularly updated, and there's a new update coming quite soon. And essentially these are published on GitHub, so for kind of to provide feedback and for full transparency. We have the wallet reference implementation. So the first release of the libraries and the code that's been developed is to be published soon, again on GitHub. And this is to be followed by regular releases based on feedback from the pilots as well as the changes to the technical specifications. And then finally, we have the 4 large-scale pilots, which are in their early stages. So they started April 1st of this year. Mostly over the summer months, they've been kind of in a project management stage, but now they're progressing into kind of their analysis of the wallet, the infrastructure that they'll need, as well as specific use cases, moving towards kind of development beginning later this quarter or kind of towards end of year. And maybe to just break down some of this a little bit more in detail. So the architecture and reference framework is essentially the document that brings together a kind of consensus around the functionality as well as that should be in the European Digital Identity Wallet, and it kind of provides for the interoperability. So essentially, it's agreeing a common set of standards that would exist for this wallet, because it's the EID space, there's a lot of developments ongoing. There's a lot of configurations you can do with the existing standards, so you need to kind of narrow it down to ensure interoperability across Europe. It's still a moving target because obviously the legislative process is ongoing, so that will have impacts downstream on the technical side. It is open on GitHub, so you'll be able to have a look yourselves and provide feedback directly there. We plan to publish new releases on a regular basis, so there should be one coming quite soon. So again, book that page and you can see how it's developing kind of in real time. With the member states' representatives. So the next is the reference implementation. So that's essentially the prototype wallet we're developing. So the Commission essentially engaged at the start of this year, well, last year, but the work started at the start of this year, to procure a contractor to essentially develop an open source implementation of essentially the European Digital Identity Wallet based on the technical specifications that were being developed. And the goal for this is to be published open source again on GitHub, including source code for iOS and Android devices. And this is again to demonstrate how it can be implemented and take lessons from that. So this again will hopefully be published quite soon. So you'll be able to have a look at that, provide feedback, and really explore the work that's been ongoing. Then the kind of final main technical work strand is the large-scale pilots. And I think this may be something of interest to a lot of people in this audience, because I know some are in these pilots. So essentially there's 4 large-scale pilots overall. So the Commission essentially went out with a call under the Digital Europe program for essentially large-scale pilots to essentially test the European Digital Identity Wallet around a number of what were called priority use cases. And essentially, there was a huge response to this call. It was actually one of the biggest received to a call under the Digital Europe program. And we ended up with 4 large-scale pilots, which is great, because essentially they cover almost every member state. There's over 250 participants or entities, both public and private, across all the pilots. And you can kind of see the main groupings here. So you have potential, which is quite a big one, led by France and Germany. It's got over 140 entities involved, and I'm not going to go into the use cases because I'm stuck for time, but it's focusing on 6 use cases. We have EWC, which is led by Sweden. It's focusing on digital travel credentials, which is payments and legal persons. You have DC4EU, which is led by Spain. It's focusing mostly on the educational and social security sectors. And then you have NOBIT, which is the Nordic Baltic ID consortium, and that's focused solely on the payments use case. I think I probably won't have time to go through the last slides, but maybe I just wanted to touch on this one because it is where Iceland is involved, just to point that out. So NOBIT is basically has 6 member states in it, and it has around 25 entities participating. It's led by Norway, who's the coordinator, and it's focused solely on essentially the implementation of payments in the context of the European Digital Identity Wallet. And Iceland is very much involved in NOBIT, so they're present via the 3 organizations there. I will not try to pronounce them because I will make a mess of it. I think that's maybe, in terms of time, are we pretty much out? Okay. There's a couple of other ones. I'll spin through these quickly. So Potential is a big one led by France and Germany. It's over 140 entities. It's got 6 key use cases. Mobile driving license is quite a big one, but all the others are also very, very significant. Then we have EWC, which is led by Sweden, and that's involving 18 member states. Just something to note is Ukraine is involved in most of the large-scale pilots because they actually associated to the Digital Europe program back in May. So they're participating, which is quite welcome. For EWC, they're focusing on payments, traveling in, essentially organizational digital identity, as they call it. And then finally, we have DC4EU, which is led by Spain, and it's focused on freedom of movement, so social security documents such as the European health insurance card, and essentially educational and professional qualifications. I'll wrap it with this slide, which you can maybe scan if you want to go to the websites for further information on the Commission proposal that was originally made, the toolbox process, which is where the technical specifications are developed, and then the provisional political agreement, which is kind of the latest update on the essentially the negotiations of the European Digital Identity regulation. So that's it for me. Okay, that did not work. Well, we'll conclude with that. So thank you very much.
I wanted to give the audience a chance perhaps to ask a question or two. Does anybody want to ask Connor anything about his talk? Or yes?
My name is Giancarlo Degani from InfoCert. And so I was wondering, do you have any insight of about the date for the next release of the RF?
We're hoping it's soon, but I don't have a concrete date set out. There is, it's essentially an ongoing process with the member states to discuss it, but essentially right now it's foreseen for some time, possibly in October, but I can't give you any concrete confirmation around that.
Thank you.
Anyone else? We have room for another question. Yep. Well then, I will.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll hear more from you later, perhaps on the panel. I want to introduce our next speaker, Thorsteinn Árnason from the Ministry of Financial and Economic Affairs.
So, as you could see on this very large screen, my name is Thorsteinn Júlíus Árnason and I work at the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs. And the reason someone from that specific ministry was invited to come and have a discussion with you here is that the digital infrastructure of the Icelandic government is one of the things that fall under the purview of the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs. And therewithin fall, for example, the matter of eID and etc. So here I am, fresh from parental leave. So if I hear a child screaming somewhere, I'm off with a crumpled bag of Cheerios. So you'll have to just finish this yourself if this happens. So I'll start by going shortly in a couple of words over the current landscape, how things stand concerning eIDs here in Iceland currently. In general, with use, if you look at the general population and how the general population has access to eIDs and uses eIDs, eID usage is widespread, and over 95% of the eligible population has activated their eID. And furthermore, eIDs are used to access loads of services, not only public services, but also online banking if you want to go to if you want to gain information from, for example, your insurance company, you use your eID, and so on and so forth, and also various government services. And for instance, there is the centralized government information hub, Iceland.is, and if you want to access that, you use your eID. The main eID scheme in Iceland is provided by RVK, which is a company which has since 2022 been fully owned by the state. And the reason for the state acquiring the company in full is, well, since access to digital services has become so reliant on eIDs, it felt prudent that the government had, well, owned at least one company in this area. And I'll touch on this a bit more later, but the main solution that this scheme uses, the eID scheme provided by RVK uses, is a mobile-based solution with a PIN. So there are a couple of ways. It's either connected to the SIM card in your phone, or there is a mobile app, but whichever way you go, you use your mobile device and you enter a PIN. And this is a method which works really well for many groups, but I'll touch on later that it's not without its problems. Well, and yeah, as I say, I'll touch on this a bit later. Iceland, as Conor mentioned earlier, the EIDIS regulation sets out a couple of, well, there are some rules that have been transposed into Icelandic laws stemming from the EIDIS regulation. The regulation itself sets out two main goals, and I'm sure most of you here are aware of the EIDIS regulation and what it entails. First of all, it's meant to ensure that national EIDs can be used to access public services available online in other EU countries. And secondly, and this stems from the first goal, is that it's meant to create a European internal market for trust services. So these are essentially the main commitments Iceland has undertaken as a part of the European single market and as a member of the EEA. But well, more importantly, I think, Iceland also, as any other government, has a duty and a responsibility to its citizens to offer access to public services in as easy a manner as possible. And I noticed in Conor's presentation, when he was talking about he had a list of benefits for the citizen of the European Digital Identity Wallet, and 2 out of 4 points in 2 out of 4 things that were to come out of this for the citizen were ease of use. And I think I think we can say that the government has a duty to its citizens to ensure that if you want to access a public service, and access to a public service is your right as a citizen, you should be able to do so in as easy a manner as possible. And that's notwithstanding that, of course, everyone, no matter their proficiency, or if you talk about the elderly or people with disabilities, everyone should be able to access the service. And I'll come on to the problem of inclusion in a bit later on. One of the challenges, the big challenges we in Iceland, and well, basically everyone in this era, has run into in terms of cross-border acceptance of digital identities, is the challenge of identity matching. And essentially the challenge is that if I were to, for example, or if I were to move to Sweden and I say to the Swedes, here I am, I've got my Icelandic eID, you should please accept this, etc. And they have to have some way to match my identity provided by the Icelandic eID scheme to an identity which might be provided by another scheme. So I can't be able to come a day later with my Danish eID, and they don't have a way to match these two together. And this problem has been quite prevalent, and I think I can safely say that, well, I think all the participants in this, I think all the member countries have run into this problem in one way or another. What this landscape looks like in Iceland currently is one of the problems we have is that the Icelandic EID node has not been updated since 2017, and that just makes cross-border interoperability quite challenging. Because of that, we have some technical challenges that must be faced before we can start to do this properly. The government agencies which rely on eIDs to provide the services, they are not connected to the node, and they are not offering for an eID login. And as you can see, this essentially tells us that currently foreign eIDs are not, well, you can't use them to access public services in Iceland really. And finally, the Icelandic eID scheme has not yet been notified, but work is underway to at least take the first preliminary steps, and both the ministry and the ministry of which has this, whose responsibility this is, are working actively towards notifying the scheme in the correct manner. A couple of more words on identity matching. Tomorrow, barring unforeseen events, and I added this just to be sure, because it feels kind of silly to stand here and tell you what will happen tomorrow. Just to make sure this is clear, I don't have the lottery numbers. But tomorrow the intention is for the Nordic and Baltic ministers of digitalization to adopt a declaration on cross-border identity matching in the region. And in this declaration, the ministers essentially commit to using and leveraging the resources to take concrete steps to ensure that the Nordic-Baltic cooperation within this specific field of eID will serve as a common platform for achieving this particular outcome, which is cross-border identity matching in the region. And I could not resist the chance of waving a piece of paper standing in front of a group full of professionals in the digital sphere. But this is the declaration which will be adopted tomorrow, as I said, unless it rains heavily or something, I don't know. But just to summarize really quickly what this means, what it says in here, it's that all of these countries, all of the players in this area, they are aware that this is a problem. They are aware that there are concrete steps that must be taken to ensure that this will be, ensure that cross-border acceptance of identification will be possible, and the declaration will be adopted, and then something will have to be done. And we'll see how that goes, but at least everyone's heart is in the game. Another of the extremely big challenges is digital inclusion, because it's no secret that there are many societal groups that have challenges both accessing and using eIDs. And this problem becomes even more pronounced because eID use for authentication here in Iceland to use digital services, it's so widespread. I think that by far the greatest number of digital services accessible online rely on the eIDs. And that means that, we have the situation that if there are some societal groups or some persons that for some reason don't have access to eIDs, they run into problem accessing these services. And this is a problem that we're quite well aware of, and a lot of work has been done on. Currently, there is a working group comprised of members of a couple of ministries and interested actors that's due to release a report. I think it's supposed to be released on the 15th of October, in the next couple of months at least. And the NOBIT group, which Conor mentioned earlier, is also working on a white paper on digital inclusion with regards to eIDs, and that's due to be released in November. And the goal there is to map out the main user groups in each of the participating countries to try to get a clear overview of the challenges they encounter and work together on possible solutions, because I think everyone's aware that this is a problem that urgently requires a solution, but at the same time, the solution it's just not apparent, at least for now. but I think I can also say that everyone is working flat out to try and find an acceptable and good solution. What we did here in Iceland as part of the work on this white paper is that we mapped out the user groups and the challenges they are facing. And the letters we have there in the table are this is the severity of the challenges facing this user group in this, the severity of this particular challenge facing this particular user group. Where A is less severe and C is more severe and B falls in between. And then what we did after we had done this was that we mapped out also possible solutions for each and every challenge. And not all solutions will suit all groups, and it's even so that not all solutions will suit all persons within a particular group. But nevertheless, I think it's important to acknowledge that this is, it's a complicated problem, but it also has, there will never be a one-size-fits-all solution. And for example, and we can I can mention that a bit here, one of the ways in which we have tried to mitigate this problem for those who access the centralized information hub Iceland.is is that there is a representative solution in place where someone can give me permission to access their pages on the Iceland.is website. And this works well, for example, because just so to show you myself as an example, I take care of various things for my mother, just because she doesn't really have the fortitude to, she's getting older and she doesn't have the fortitude to take care of some of these things herself. But she can log in herself and give me permission to watch over her digital spaces so I can see if there's something that's remiss or something like that. But this only, as of now, this is only possible for this centralized hub. And this solution, of course, doesn't work for everyone. I mean, if you don't want to give someone else access to your pages, then that shouldn't be the only option available to you. So another possible way of at least mitigating this problem is the possibility of creating an alternative to the current eID scheme, because currently there is this eID scheme by Aukenni, which has a high level of assurance and is, I think in general there is just, everyone's really happy with how the eID scheme works in general. But it doesn't suit those and doesn't work for those who can't, for example, who can't enter a PIN. For those that can't enter PIN individually and without assistance. So maybe there's the possibility of just creating an alternative scheme, an alternative way to identify yourself. This alternative scheme may not offer the same high level of assurance as the existing one, but in many ways that might just be acceptable, because I'm not entirely sure myself, at least, that you have to use the highest possible level of assurance to access the complaints you've sent to the consumer agency. I think you should be able to find just some, we must be able to find the middle ground there. So, and the problem is because in general, the eID scheme used now and Digital Iceland, which is an office within a department within the Ministry of Finance, which assists governmental agencies with advancing their digital transformation, has an authentication module that you can plug in if you want to use, and that's reliant on the eID scheme. But if you were to add another method, another authentication method to there, maybe that would be acceptable, at least to access some services. And that would be, at the very least, a step in the right direction, because the mode of authentication can and does constitute an entrance barrier to some. And well, I'm sure we can do something about that. And in that vein, what next? First of all, we'll have to follow up on the Minister's Declaration, because, well, otherwise it's just a prop for me to wave up here, and I'm sure that'll be done. Then there is the transposition of various EU regulations and directives concerning accessibility and the IDAs and so on and so forth. Currently, and in the, well, this winter, the plan is to set a law on the governance of IT services operated by the government. And there we will, the plan is to set a framework which all government agencies operating operating IT services must follow. Must follow to ensure, just to ensure that the practice is not fragmented between different agencies. And what can be done there, I think, is, well, a couple of months ago, well, years ago, some interesting work was done on, there was a policy on the use of cloud-based services. And in that, and this was led by the Ministry of Finance and with other interested actors. And what was done there was that they took the types of data and, oh, this sounded terrifying for me, but nevertheless, they took the different types of data and said, okay, this kind of data must be protected in this and this manner. And something similar could be done with the type of services. This kind of service absolutely requires the strongest possible method of authentication. But in the same vein, some services might not require the same method of authentication. And finally, there are many ongoing projects which concern inclusion, and we are currently working hard towards the ultimate goal of ensuring that unnecessary entrance barriers are eliminated. And yeah, this is me. This is all we have.
Thank you for this, Thorstein. This is very interesting. Does anyone want to, at this point, ask a question, or anyone seeking clarification on any issue in this talk? Hang on. Put it closed.
Hello. I found very interesting your approach to inclusion, because I think it's an extremely important matter, and I would be interested in knowing more about the ongoing projects on inclusivity, because it's, I mean, a really crucial matter. And is it possible to have access to more information about this? Because really, it's such a difficult topic, and no, I finished. Thanks.
Yes, is this? Yeah, this is turned on, right? Yeah. Okay. So the projects concerning inclusion is, well, it's mainly what I touched upon earlier, that we're working towards different means of authentication, and we're working towards guidance for the government institutions that use eIDs to access their services. So we can support them so to try and make their digital services more inclusive towards all. And then the big milestones will be the report by the working group that will be released on the 15th of October. In October at the very least, I think, and then the white paper by the Nobel Group. And I'm fairly sure that we can ask to have that made, well, for the participants here to be notified when that comes out, right? Doesn't that sound? Yeah.
I'm happy to follow up on that. One more question.
Hello, my name is Kauri. 2 questions. There was something about some node not having been updated since 2017. I just wanted to ask what this node is. This was in relation with eID, I think. It was on an earlier slide. Some node had not been updated. And the other question is, how does Smart Wallet, the app, fit into the big scheme of things? I know about Auðkenni, but I don't know about Smart Wallet, the one that keeps your driver's license. Is it an interim solution? Is it something that you are in charge of? So those were my 2 questions.
Okay. So the eID scheme operated by Auðkenni, and Halli, I please ask you to jump in if I'm saying something horribly wrong here, but the eID scheme operated by Auðkenni is based upon this eID node. And the current one has not, when I at least last heard, been updated since 2017. Should we maybe elaborate on this in the...
Yeah. I mean, the nodes basically are an infrastructure within the EU community. So it's a way of the countries to basically communicate to each other. So if you're accessing a service in Denmark, for example, applying for a school, you want to authenticate, so you press a button, then you get a country list, and you would see the Icelandic flag, and you will, select the Icelandic flag. Then the node in Denmark would talk to the node in Iceland, basically. And the Icelandic node would then show up the options you have for your IDs in Iceland. And this is the node that he was, referring to, that basically is in the process of being updated because it's, needs to be updated all the time. So it's, easier for everybody to utilize the infrastructure here in Iceland to communicate with other nodes within the EU. So that's the node part.
Yeah, and the smart wallet part, you helped me out a bit there when you asked if this was something that we had any input into, and unfortunately the short answer is no. So I won't be able to give you a very good answer on that. So apologies, but so I said the answer to one question was I don't know, and I outsourced the answering of the other one. So very efficient.
Okay. Shall we thank Thorsten for his contribution? And our next speaker is Alicia Jimenez. Am I saying that correctly? Jimenez. She is the coordinator for the European Impulse project.
Yeah, I will try to speak louder. So thanks, Kristján, for preparing everything this with the city of Reykjavik, and also the opportunity to give more visibility to the Impulse project to the community. And yeah, I'm Alicia Jimenez, as she said, and I'm the project coordinator of this European project. Very initial information general about the project is that it was funded in a call from 2020, but the project started in in February 2021, and we will end next January. So we are in the last round of the project, and it was about 4 million euros project with many organizations that I will show you now. So I will go through all these things, but I will start who we are. We are 15 partners from 8 countries around all Europe, and we also have external participants, experts that help us in the feedback to obtain the impulse solution. Because I would like to highlight this is not a technical call of the European project, but more on how disruptive technologies are included in public services. So I don't know if it is casualty, but we focus on electronic identity. But yeah, it's more focused on the acceptance and the inclusion of these technologies in the society and in the public services itself. So our mission is firstly to transform this approach of the digital identity, now that it is centralized or federated in more of the cases, to go through a more self-sovereign identity approach, that it is in mind of countries, Europe, but not so much established as other identification models that we are used to nowadays. Then, as I mentioned before, one of the main missions of this project is to evaluate benefit, risk, cost, limitation, how will be the adoption, sustainability, and future use of this kind of electronic identity, in this case for the public services, but that in the future can be transferred to the private domain as well. And for that, we wanted to test it in 5 different countries, in 6 different pilots. Because we have seen in our, and I will speak more later, the different infrastructures, practices in the public services, cultural aspect, affect on how is the acceptance of this kind of solution. So this is more a graphical summary of our mission. So the public services have a demand. We propose a technological solution to face this demand, and we make in the project, it is in the center, as you can see, the impact assessments from different perspectives, so ethical, legal, socioeconomic, political, and standards, to draft, I will say, the pathways for the adoption, escalation, and sustainability. I will go now in a little bit more detail of the technologies that we use in the impulse solution, because we have been talking about electronic identity, but there are different ways to create an electronic identity. So we rely on 2 disruptive technologies. One is artificial intelligence, that it is well known nowadays by the population, but in this case we use for the biometrics authentication of the person and also for the document verification. Impulse is based on 2 steps. First one is the onboarding. So you have to make a selfie of your face and then a photo of your physical ID. So the artificial intelligence make comparisons, collect the information from the photo, and create, I will not say create, but the person, the role that have the permissions for that, issue the credential for the wallet. And then we have the blockchain, in which is the infrastructure where impulse solution is supported to ensure a self-sovereign identity model. We also include the smart contract related technology to this blockchain, in which we allow the customization on how your data is used, and you have the possibility to revoke the use at any time. So with this solution and our mission, we have 2 main outcomes. On the one hand, the technical implementation of the electronic identity to be installed and tested in different pilots as European projects. And then also these actionable roadmaps. In this project, we will develop 7 roadmaps, one for each of the individual pilots and another one more at the European level. And for that we are involving and we are in contact with different networks, digital innovation hubs from all around Europe, experts in advisory boards. We are preparing workshops, also the population that can give us the input to make this draft of the roadmap for the inclusion of Impulse. This is shortly just to show you some screenshots of the Impulse application, some of the steps you have to follow. I will say this is the last version. We did another before, and with the feedback with the participants, we were able to improve it, not only in the design, but also in the process to create your credential and also to use it in later stages. And I put in this site all the regulation policies, standards, things that you have to take into account to include this such solution in the public services or in the market. We are following the European blockchain service infrastructure and also the ESIF model for identity management. And in this case, as EPSI is close to following GDPR and eIDAS and the next eIDAS 2, hopefully by the end of the year, requirements, we are up to date to make the necessary improvements to be compliant with all these regulations. And additionally, inside the project, we were able to be participants, and we are currently participating, into standardization groups. Yeah, I only put the number, but the first one is for the blockchain and distributed ledger technologies, and the second one is for artificial intelligence and biometrics that are really close to what we are developing in Impulse. And then this is mainly the main points we are tackling in the roadmaps. The background of the different pilots, the technology used is the same in all the cases, as well as the Impulse application, and then the specification and learnings based on each of the pilots to draft this timeline for the adoption. The European roadmap will follow similar structure, but we have to widen the pilot case to the European level, of course. And these are the 6 use cases. I will go to each of them now, but you can see they are spread all over Europe. So we have a very good representation of different aspects and locations. So the first one is in Aarhus, Denmark. In this case, we can think that access public services, online public services, is only from a website or from your mobile phone. But in this case, we have a specific situation in which in our house they have some lockers installed in the city where I would say the city council can drop some identity cards or very sensitive information of the citizens, so they can pick up there, so they don't have to go to the city hall or to or at a specific time, so they can go there. But we are talking about your passport, your ID card, so you have to ensure you are the person that is collecting this information. So it is very important to demonstrate you are in front of this locker and that you can authenticate your identity to collect it. So we implemented this in a couple of round pilots, and it was well received by the people. I will focus on the feedback we collect from this second pilot round. They think it's similar or slightly better than the current option they have based on pins. But the main thing is that they would have liked to have installed this biometric identification in the locker instead of in the mobile, because you can forget it, but you are still the person. So yeah, this is one of the things they will like. And they will be willing, of course, free is better for everyone, but if necessary, pay a little amount if it is spread to additional services, not only to this one, but of course we are in a European project, so we have to focus in a control scenario for testing. Then in the Ertzaintza, this is a law enforcement agency in Spain. It's kind of a regional police unit. And in this case, they offer online the possibility to submit complaint that happened in the street. So someone broke, I don't know, your car, so you can make the picture, submit it in that moment, so you are in the place to do the complaint. But because of regulation, you have to be in presence in the police office in 72 hours after submitting this complaint. So this sometimes is burden the people, so they have to go there. And with a limit or a specific kind of complaints, this can be done automatically online. But you have to ensure you are the person that it is doing this complaint. So this will help not only the citizens that usually only need to submit this complaint for a matter of paperwork with your insurance to get the feedback or solve these issues, and also good for the police department because they can spend their time on very critical complaints that require more of their time. They see that it is simple to use, the Impulse solution. They have some doubts about the security aspect, but in general they were willing to use it, but not to pay because we have similar solutions, and not with this self-sovereign identity model, but they are free. So they have a little bit reluctant in this part of paying for the solution. Then in Gijón, this is a city council as well in the north of Spain. They have a city card where you have access to different services of the city. Nowadays it's a physical card. You have to collect it and bring it with you to do things in the city. But the future of this by using Impulse is that you can have on the one hand your physical card and being able to access to it through your mobile, so you can leave the car at home, but in the future also to have only the electronic card in your device, in your mobile, so no need to have a physical card in this way. They also like it, this Impulse solution to identify and to simplify the work for them for use the city card. And they will also recommend it. It was a good feedback. Of course, there were some negative aspects to improve the process that somehow was a little bit difficult. Then they also highlight the concern of the trust in the solution because we are not known. I mean, Impulse is from a project. We are not a known solution in the market still. And they would like to reduce the times of interaction for the authentication. Then we have the municipality of Pestera in Bulgaria. In this case, they are offering, I will say, typical services for obtaining certificates that the public administration can provide to you. And you have to go to the public administration, you have to wait for the queue, and so on. So this is a way to improve this process for the Bulgarian municipality in this way. They were very positive about this electronic identity use through biometrics and also with your mobile phone. I would say because they have other solutions more based on a USB, they have to pay for that to authenticate. So there was more difference between the current option they have for identify themselves than the one proposed by Impulse. Of course, they were worried about what about hackers or if you someone stole your phone. But yeah, it's something we have to promote better and ensure that the population that we are talking about secure and private solution. Then we have a union camera and info camera from Italy. In this way, we are talking not about the individual identity, I don't know if the correct way to say as a person, but individual identity as a legal person because it's the representative of a company. And a company also have some online services to do and also need to download some certificates of the company, but you need to demonstrate you are the representative of this organization. In this case, they have in Italy a well-established electronic solution for identification. They see not much value, so this means we have to sell it better for the population. And this use case particularly focus more on the terms of services, the security, where the information is stored, and I would say they were more deeply in how the solution was developed and the security concerns. And finally, the city of Reykjavik tested this solution on a general way, not specifically for a service, but how to access online services that the city of Reykjavik can provide. Many of the participants found it is sometimes difficult to follow the process and with many steps. So this is something we have to improve. And also, the good point is that they like the facial recognition to be used because you don't have to remember the PIN number or another card, so with your face will be enough. But we have to reduce like the steps for using this solution. Most of them prefer a federated model rather than the self-sovereign identity we are proposing, but I think it's a matter of explaining better what implies in terms of data ownership and privacy. That was one of the things highlighted in most of the pilots. And the big lesson is that the smaller technology developers maybe doesn't have so much room in this saturated market because there are well-established solutions. But this in particular in this in Iceland. So in summary, for all the use cases, they like it. The application, of course, with these small things we have to improve for the process, but it was well accepted with easy deployment and installation in their mobile phones. The main concern is about the security issues and the trust in the application provider. And then it was not clear the additional benefits in some of the cases of this self-sovereign identity model. But I assume with the presentations we have before, this will be better established in the population in the future years to see the benefits of these models. The next steps from the project, and with this I will finalize. First thing is to define the exploitation plan. We have to see how is the market and what is the room for this self-sovereign identity. Also very useful, the 4 large-scale pilot that Connor previously mentioned of the domains where it's going to be tested. Then another point that, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, the cross-border issue, because in Impulse we have focused on the testing in a city. So the online services that a specific city provide. But what happened is someone from Iceland want to go to Gijón and want to use the city card. So you have your identity from Iceland that it should be valid for all Europe. So you don't have to register again and make other things. So this cross-border testing is the next step from Impulse, probably Impulse 2, 3, we don't know. And then we have the inclusion of additional credentials that I think Connor already mentioned, the attributes. So you can adjust or not adjust to relate your identity, high-level assurance of identification to other micro-credentials from your education, from the driver licensing, from your social security and health, and so on. That open the opportunity to go to other services. The regulation and standards compliance, this is something that you have to be up to date every time on how it's evolving. And then big lesson learned from the participants in the, not from such technical perspective, is the promotion and adoption of these disruptive technologies, and specifically the self-sovereign identity electronic identity model, because in my humble opinion, we have not spread that very well, so we have not been able to show the benefits, especially on the security data of this model and the ownership of the user of their identity. And with that, I finalize my presentation.
Anyone who wants to ask Alicia questions, need for clarification on any of those points?
Just a general question about the blockchain part of the project. Did the end users of the system notice any difference because of blockchain? Or was it just hidden in the background? I imagine that the AI part made it easier to get identified, but I don't know about the blockchain part.
Yeah, we did at the beginning of the project kind of a questionnaire to the population, and it is true that the artificial intelligence is better or well received by the citizens or the people in regards of acceptance and understanding. The blockchain, many of them didn't know about this technology, or they focus more on the crypto part that was in the past related to the blockchain. So this is part of the promotion and better selling, how the blockchain make this kind of electronic identity better for the security or ownership of your identity. This is an aspect we have to improve for sure, and that we learn within the project. But we were transparent. We tell them we are using that technology.
Hi, I'm Alexandra Prim, member of the Reykjavik City Council. I have one question, because one concern I've noticed in people around me at least is they are concerned with the growth of facial recognition with AI assistance in conjunction with like surveillance in public spaces. And I realized that these projects are not connected, but that's sort of a fear in many members of the public. So how can we make it more clear that these authentication methods are in fact not going to be used as part of something like that, and are instead methods to help people have better ownership over their own credentials and their own information?
Okay. Yeah. In the partner in charge of developing the biometrics solution to the face identification have been working in several modules for anti-spoofing and make, I mean, we are working on that. They are selling this particularly to some clients, and the idea is to, your mobile phone can be used by your child, by your colleagues or whatever, so just to allow that with your face, you are using at that moment that identity. Because maybe with other options, a PIN number, someone can steal it or copy it or something like this. So we thought it was like the main way to identify yourself only when you want to use your identity, even if you left your mobile to another people. But of course, there is room for improvement, and this is what we are trying with the project.
Anyone else who wants to comment or ask a question? Okay, well, let's thank Alicia for her contribution. And the next speaker is Óskar Sandholt. He's director of our Department of Services and Innovation here at the City of Reykjavik.
Hello all. No, please. Oh, sorry. I will try to stay close to the microphone. I'm used to moving around a bit, but I will behave. Yes, hello everyone. Nice to be with you. I was asked to talk about Reykjavik City's journey in digital transformation and our collaboration with the state and other municipalities. So I'm not basically going to talk about authentication, even though authentication, electronic authentication is very important for everything we do. In fact, at the moment, one of our big projects is delayed because of problems with electronic identification. So we're hoping that will be solved in the coming future. Digital transformation is a buzzword or a buzz phrase today, as you all know, but it has been going on for some time. Reykjavik basically started what we can formally say digital transformation in 2016. I at least counted from there. That is the year that our service policy was agreed on and made public, the first service policy of Reykjavik. And in that policy it stated that basically digital solutions should be the first mean of service. So it was quite a revolutionary policy. And beginning then, like from 2017, we started digitizing what is usually called low-hanging fruits, small projects and stuff like that. But in 2018, we actually saw that we wouldn't go anywhere if we would just continue picking low-hanging fruits and going into small projects, because they didn't have enough impact to make people actually understand or believe in the transition that is necessary around digital transformation. In essence, digital transformation is not about technology, it's about people and culture. Technology plays part, but it is not the main ingredient, basically, in our opinion. So we had stepped into many departments and stepped out again because we couldn't go anywhere. We can't go anywhere unless the stakeholders or the owners of the service want to change. So in 2018, we basically sat down and said, now it's time to do something significant, and it was decided to collaborate with the welfare department on a financial aid app. The financial aid process was very complex. It was done in 5 places in the city, different ways in all of the 5 places, a lot of people working on it, a lot of burden for the citizens to collect papers all around, long waiting time, etc. And in fact, 2019, we delivered that app, and at the same time, we were actually formed. We were called something, we were an office in City Hall called Service and Operations. But in 2019, the people who rule the city decided it was time to step things up and innovate a bit in the city. So the Department of Service and Innovation was founded in June 2019, and it was basically meant to tackle the 4th industrial revolution. It was meant to tackle changes in the city, to lead changes in the city. But we decided to do it based on the service policy, because, like I say, technology is meaningless in itself. It only has meaning if it does something for people or anything else. So we basically shy away from always talking about technology. It's irrelevant in many ways, and many of our products are basically not digital. They are just new methods. Okay, so the first major project came out 2019. That was the financial aid, and that was a game changer, basically. It was selected as the best web system of that year in some kind of a ceremony. And then, if you remember, a few years back, COVID hit us in 2020, and then this system actually proved its existence because COVID, amongst other, had those results that more people needed financial aid, and the system was then fully running, or the first version of it, and we could actually service much more people, service them instead of having a waiting time of approximately 20 to 30 days. They got an answer within 24 hours, took them 10 minutes to apply, etc. And it was much less burden also for the Department of Welfare that then could use its staff to basically service people instead of pushing papers around. So that was kind of something that I think that the people who run the city or rule the city saw that there was a real benefit in this. What also happened in COVID was that Reykjavik decided to invest itself out of the crisis, and strangely enough, it was not only in cement and asphalt. They also decided for the first time to look at digital and IT as an investment, or like interiors. So from the years 2021 to 2023, they put roughly like 3 billion Icelandic kronas per year into this investment on average. And I know Icelandic kronas don't make any sense to foreigners. It's roughly 20 million euros, I would say. That's quite significant for Icelandic economy, at least. And this was supposed to basically turn the city around, get like a head start into further changes that are coming. And we are finishing this project, this major investment project, at the end of this year. We basically reached all of our goals and more. So we are quite actually happy with the outcomes. But we went in there with 3 guiding lights. Always focus on user-centric service. The user is what we think most about, and a user can be a citizen or a legal entity or whatever. Digital transformation, we call it, which is basically a transformation of how we do things. And then we have the third guiding light is culture hacking. Culture hacking is, I think, something that Gartner formed a few years back, and it's basically about, instead of making huge changes with lots of effort, we change small things every day and try to change the culture and how people think. And that's worked. And then we got the first digital council in 2022 in last elections. That has been, I think, very beneficial for the city and Iceland as a whole. And it's going to be exciting to see where that goes. And I'm not going to go into our organizational chart, but we do a lot more. We service the portals that citizens connect to the city with. We have document archiving, we have document management, and more. So we are not only in digital transformation, but the whole operation that we run is basically has transformed itself, more or less. So why are we doing this? You maybe know this, of course, all. Digital transformation is everywhere. Digital just is, as we say that. If we're not going to do a digital transformation, I don't know what we're going to do. We have to follow what is happening in the world. Users expect digital solutions. And they get upset when they don't get a digital solution. And when they get used to services from huge companies like Apple or Microsoft or whatever that are kind of friction-free, they get very upset when they get into the friction environment of the government, and they instantly hate us. And we don't want that. We want to be liked. So digital is something that just is, even if we don't like it. And we kind of, what shall I say? We kind of have to follow also the development, because what people expect changes constantly. I, for example, needed to sign a consent the other day because of a PhD interview from America. And I got sent a PDF file that I had to print out, sign, scan, and send back. I'm used to signing digitally. It was a weird experience, I have to say. So expectations change. And I mean, if we are here now, where are we in 5 years? So this is an ongoing project and it will never end. I'm sorry for those who hate technology. Well, and there is a demand that you can service yourself, preferably whenever you want, not between 8:15 and 4:20, like some opening hours are. But when you are just home and you suddenly think about something and you want to service yourself. And I have to say, from our experience, digital transformation drives optimization. There is no other way to optimize nowadays, I think, than driving digital transformation. And it also drives changes. So we started this humongous project in 2021, 1st of January. We had to do a lot of things very quickly. And even if we had some experience, I mean, I'm not born yesterday, there was a lot of things that we didn't know. And what we wish we knew then, and we know now, is, for example, 3-year planning is not good. Long-term vision is what you need, because this takes more time and it's constant. It's not a short-term effort. You have to kind of define your North Star. That is your utopia. Where do you want to be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? And focus on it. You have to also have an achievable roadmap. We are very strict on, like when we define projects, that they have an outcome that we can actually handle. And if projects start to grow while we are doing them, we don't do that, we stop. And we always release just a minimal viable product, and we take version 2, version 3, etc. We want to have achievable roadmap, and something that we can also fit into a year without everybody becoming burnt out and tired. You also have to onboard stakeholders. We don't do anything unless the stakeholders are on board. We kind of work with the business, as we call it in Reykjavik, the departments that own the services. If they don't want to change, so very little things that we can do. And like I say, we use service design, storytelling. These are our main methods in trying to continue in this. And what we learned is there is a huge preference for many to just hold on to things because they have them or something, and they always like them. We can't do that. Even us have to sometimes let things go that we thought were fantastic, but they just don't are fantastic anymore. And there has to be a reason for holding on to things. If you have done something always in the same way, why do you want to continue it? You have to always answer the why question. Nothing is irreplaceable, basically. There's always something new coming. We have to ask questions. Start with a Why is a book that some of us have read, because a lot of things don't make sense. Even if they are done in a way that people think makes sense, it doesn't make sense if you look at it. And then there is the friendly dinosaur, as it has been called within our department. These are the key people. The friendly dinosaur is the positive employee or the middle manager who is all in for it until he has to change what he is doing. So you have to find the friendly dinosaur and tackle these people. They are the key to release the flood. Don't listen to the haters, I would say. when we started this transformation in 2021, we had to come up with a method. Our method was a mix of in-housing and outsourcing. We were criticized a lot for that. The industry hated it, basically, and some government agencies also said you should outsource everything. We decided to go like a mixed way, so we have kind of a core team inside or in-house to synchronize, to reuse, to keep the standard, and then we outsource a lot of other things. It was a lot of pressure. We needed to hire a lot of people. The market was upset about that. The word on the street was that we shouldn't pick all the good people from the market, but at the same time, they wanted quick solutions. It was kind of like a catch-22 in that, but that's another question or another thing. And then what we also learned is like, don't let the past wear you down, because everybody in this room and knows a horror story about an IT project that went overboard and cost trillions and is not used. We have endless stories of that, and each time somebody talks about digital transformation, they say, oh, but what about the smart card project? Yeah, that was 2000. It's 23 years ago, but and you know, IT has developed. IT is now composable. We can, with APIs, let systems like in a middle layer speak to each other, etc., etc. So these big projects are, and I'm not saying it's not like without reason that people have these problems. I mean, we have very bad examples, but you can't let it wear you down. You have to believe in what you're doing, and the timing in this is also good. And if you are using agile methods where you are very strict on not letting your projects grow into something uncontrollable, I think you are in a pretty good state. So what to keep in mind, like I said, define your utopia. Where do you want to be? One step at a time, small achievable tasks. Very, very important question, and one of our biggest efforts basically has gone into the infrastructure. Is your infrastructure ready? Digital solutions rely on modern infrastructure and data, access to data. If this is not in good order, other stuff doesn't work. We have to be able to archive decisions, for example, automatically, not by like printing out PDF files and putting them in folders. We also have to be able to get the data we need to make decisions or to make everything work. So a lot of time for the past 3 years has gone into kind of combing the spaghetti into like, not in, like from being a spaghetti into being like strings. Stakeholders, you don't go anywhere without the key stakeholders. It's completely useless to try to change somebody who doesn't want to change. It's completely useless. And then you have to be courageous. It takes a lot of courage to change people who don't want to change or like find it difficult. And then you just have to start, because otherwise nothing happens. Working with the state, I was asked about saying a few words about that. In general, we have had a very, very good collaboration with the state. They are kind of using the same methods, or like the same atmosphere is there, kind of this startup atmosphere, if you can call it that. We kind of know of each other, but there are no basically direct links between these two entities. And we kind of actually have to say we miss it, because the state started a little bit later than us. We already had started our journey, and they came in and started changing, and they are doing a fantastic job in that. But it would be very nice to have a small conversation about how can we do this so it fits, everything fits together. So if anybody is here from the state, we want to talk to you more, or confer with you, maybe it's a better word. We basically work with that kind of an idea that our solutions are on their platform, and preferably vice versa, because Iceland.is has the methodology that all public service should be in there. We are completely agree on that, but it has also to be with us, because we run the systems that make the decisions and keep the decisions, etc. We cannot split our IT environment into two. That would not make any sense for us. And then we reuse what is sensible. We are reusing a lot from Iceland.is. The latest example is that we are now starting to use the what is it called? The platform where you like put out decisions to be like discussed with the general public. So we're going to use the same system that we take from them, etc. The difference between state and Reykjavik is basically Digital Iceland works like an independent agency for other government institutions, and they have kind of they have a small team, so they limit the in-house design or development. They mostly outsource like everything they do. We are, of course, a city. We have other ongoing day-to-day operations. One of our key ingredients is the digital leaders. We call them our double agents. So to be able to connect to the business, like Department of Welfare, Department of School and Leisure, we placed digital leaders that are our employees, but they work in the business units. And they work there next to the, was this my time? Sorry, I will hurry up. They work there with the directors to identify problems, solutions, and then they come to us and we prioritize it with them. And we, like I say, we have a core team inside that is synchronizing, running the middleware, keeping everything intact. So working with the municipalities, it's not a fair comparison. We are approximately 140,000 in Reykjavik. Next biggest municipality is 45,000. So we have a completely different needs. We try to work with them, but we are just in a different ballgame. So we have tried, but I think most of the stuff we have done has not been very successful. And then again, you have municipalities in Iceland that have 45 people, and then you have municipalities that are 140, so there's a huge difference in needs in these places. And then, like I said, I think it was the Christmas of 2021, the mayor, our great mayor, sent us a Christmas card that said, "Never stop daring." It was a difficult political time here. We kind of used this as our slogan, because like I said, it takes a lot of courage to change. It takes a lot of courage to walk into a department and say, "We're going to change this with you now." And there's a lot, because everybody hates mistakes, but we have to make mistakes. So you have to be courageous. So we kind of say this all the time, never stop daring, because then nothing happens. And that was it. Sorry for going on.
Thank you, Oscar. This round, is anybody who wants to ask a direct question? Yes?
Thank you. I was fascinated by your speech, and I see that you are trying to change how things are done into the public administration. So I imagine that you faced really huge obstacles on the way when trying to introduce new solutions, new way of doing things. And I'd like to know what are the main ones, and how you coped with them. Thank you.
Sorry, what are the main
obstacles that you faced when trying to introduce your new solutions?
Humans. No, but that is really, the technology is very easy, basically. It basically does what it's told. But the human factor is the most important one. So when we are doing this, it has taken us this almost 3 years to kind of change the thinking inside of the city. And that was just one of the biggest projects to kind of let people realize the benefits of changing how they work. And now in the financial environment we are in, this push is coming from more places. But to make people actually understand the possibilities, to really want to change how they handle something that they have handled in the same way, maybe for 30 years or something. That is the biggest obstacle. And to narrow it down, then middle managers, human middle managers, are then the most heavy obstacle. They are often the friendly dinosaur that we talked about. So, and then, of course, there are all challenges in between departments or between state and city. But by far the biggest challenge is the cultural change. And like I say, this is not a technology project, this is a cultural project.
My question was quite related to the Francesca. How are you facing this recruitment of humans to test the new solutions and to understand what are the main problems they see or what they will accept it if you make the changes?
That is what we call the culture hacking. So how it has basically worked is we try to use the method of wanting them to work with us. So by having key pilots or key projects like the financial aid and more, and the results that they are developing or showing, and what the directors could then do with their staff instead, that is selling itself a little bit in. So instead of everybody hating us and not wanting to work with us, that we are now have reached the top of the hill because now we are basically facing more demand that we can handle. But it has been just slowly changing, showing progress, showing that your life is going to be better after, and your work is going to even be more fun after the difficult period of 66 days or whatever it takes to take on a new habit. So it's like, what was it called? It's like learning by doing method in a way. And now actually we have the Digital Council, which is also so the digital thinking and agenda is now even more high profile. And that is also helping us in this. I don't know if it answers your question or not.
Did you have a question? Okay, we have 3 questions. Oscar, are you willing to take 3 more? Okay. Hey.
You mentioned the smart card. I can't believe how much progress we have made since the smart card was. I just thought I'd ask you, what was the lesson you got from that experience? If it's not still too short ago to discuss.
Well, I was actually not working on the smart card, but it was before my time here. But I mean, everybody in IT in Iceland knows about this project. So what we learned basically from that, and it's a very good lesson. Even if it was a bit expensive, it was a good lesson. What happened in the smart card project, sorry foreigners, but the smart card project was supposed to be in the beginning a card to pay for the bus fare. That was the start. Then people decided, wouldn't it be fun if we could also go into swimming pools with this card? And then wouldn't it be fun if you could also go to museums with the card? And so the project just grew, and that was the lesson basically. Stick to your focus, never let your project, if somebody brings in new demands, say no, this is on a backlog, we do it in the next version.
I'm actually not going to ask a question. This is a very good presentation, and I have many opportunities to ask Oscar questions, but I would like to add a little bit in how they've been facing the challenges, because as being part of it, but also slightly on the outside, what I have seen in how they do it and what we have been doing also on the sort of political end of the scale, well, okay, what we have done, and I think it has been helpful, is we have been very clear that they have a strong mandate to do this, that people who are resisting internally in the culture, that we try to tell them as clearly as possible that this will get done. The political will of the city council is that this is to be done. That is not up for much debate, but what can be debated is to what extent, on what time frame, and in what ways. So another thing is these early sort of pilot projects that showed people very clearly how much things could be improved, how much time you could save, how much money you could save, how much easier and better a service could become with the financial aid program. That was a very sort of powerful example to get early on. And then what they've been doing is the sort of what they call the greenhouse, is when they sort of, it's sort of a workshop, when a project is starting out, they get in the people who are working with the service as it currently is, and all sorts of people from like the digital services and everyone, and they sort of workshop how the service should be, like what is the end goal, how do we get there, are our current processes servicing that or not? And that way the people who are currently working with the program and will have to eventually implement a new solution will have ownership in the new solution and not feel like it is something imposed on them from from the outside. So it's a way to create ownership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's correct. If I may add, we use this, like I said, service design basically. So we have focus groups, both from the staff and from the users, and we also, like Alexandra was explaining, have this place called Greenhouse where you can come with your service and say, how can I improve this? And we go with them through service design in that. But it was a game changer when the politics came on board. It was very difficult before the politics decided that this was something important, because the politics were in the past a little bit afraid because of the smart card and all this stuff. They were afraid about one more giant IT project. And of course, it's a big project, but kind of successful, even if I say so myself.
Thanks. Germany famously isn't quite so far with digitization. One factor that tends to, or seems to often make digitization projects, especially in the area of public services and public administration, very cumbersome or slow and difficult to implement, is that it's not only about changing processes or sort of digitizing processes and revising processes to work in a digital world, but also the sort of, if you want, the sort of technical or sociological changes then often collide with legal structures. So you have this extensive set of legal stipulations regulating everything under the sun, connecting to how public services are provided, how public administration works, which are in turn often premised on these services and processes being provided in an analog way and not in a digital way. Not necessarily because anybody sort of was particularly opposed to digital, just because these regulations were set down 50 years ago, when obviously that was the way you did it. Consequence, of course, is that it's not only then often about revising the process itself, but you also find yourself entangled with these legal structures which you have to change. So I was wondering, what was the experience in that regard in Iceland? Like, did you have similar problems, sort of finding yourself confronted with complex legal thickets? And if so, like, how did you cut your ways through? Or maybe you were luckier and there was just not such an overgrowth of regulation, perhaps?
It's an excellent point. And talking about obstacles, I didn't want to name lawyers, but they were an obstacle. But this is a very, like I said, it's an excellent point. And for example, when we went into the financial aid, the first project, we had a really good player in the director of welfare. So she was very strict on asking, because the lawyers always said, no, we cannot change this. But then she constantly said, why can't we do it? And they had to go and try to find the reasoning. And actually, in many times, the reasoning wasn't there. It was just some very cautious lawyer who had interpreted the law 50 years back, whatever, in that way, just to be sure. But in many ways, sometimes it's difficult to get through the law. And we are so lucky in the service of, in the Department of Service and Innovation, that we have creative lawyers. And which are doing a fantastic job. And they help us a lot by communicating with other lawyers. But in fact, this is a humongous obstacle. And one of the things we have tackled in this journey, I'm sorry I could talk here all day, but is letters to citizens. Before we started, letters to citizens about something like you have to renew your application for lease, like if you rent, to get like some down payments for that. They were 2 pages of law speak. And then somewhere there was one sentence that mattered. It was you have to come and reaffirm that you are still in a leasing a house. So we have also tackled this and are tackling this with the departments, that they make it understandable. And we have also taken our whole website, which is the biggest web in Iceland, and rewritten it so it can be understood by a 16-year-old, let's say that, and be translated then also. But this is a huge obstacle and a huge factor, and now we are trying to work with something that we call, what do we call it, inbuilt compliance. That we're trying to build compliance into all solutions that we either make or we buy. And yeah, that's one of the most important factors.
Okay, well, thank you, Oscar. This was very inspiring. We are a bit over on time, but it would be good to take a short break. If people want to grab a cup of coffee, bring that back to your chair, something to nibble on. We're going to set up a panel. It's going to take a couple of minutes, and Alexandra Bream is going to take over and introduce the panel and lead a discussion session. So help yourselves. Thank you.
see only the pictures. That's normally what we work on. Yes, exactly. So that's a little, so you're always like, every time there's a claim, you add one provision in the software. This is not going to happen again. And every time it's just, we're always trying to trying, and I think it helps a lot to have lawyers in our department, because then we can speak the same language, we can speak the same language, so they trust me, they don't say there's no, they say no to the technical, because they don't understand, they don't understand why it works, so we don't want to talk the same language. And then they say, and this is so hard. They say, no, it's not possible. And I was like, okay, let's speed up. You will show me. Show me all the rules. I don't know. Maybe it's not possible. Show me the rules. Okay, let's see. If we do it, and we can find a way. And we are talking about the impact assessment.
Freistandi.
Oh.
Kekja. Okay, I think we are probably starting soon. Oh, okay. Okay. So, if people would like to finish grabbing refreshments, finish going to the bathroom, maybe start taking seats soon, we should probably get started with the panel because we are slightly over time. Whoa. So, hello, my name is Alexandra Prím. I am a city councillor for the city of Reykjavik, and I am the chair of the Reykjavik City Digital Council, which was first formed in 2022. And it is my honor to preside over this panel for now. I was not planning to be a very active participant, not very political. It's probably a little bit. It's not cool to do that too much, but I am very happy to have this discussion, especially since my party, one of our core founding ideals is the development of digital rights into sort of human rights into the digital era, and sort of equipping society to advance and be capable of dealing with the future as it grows. And so governments and cities aren't 30, 40 years behind while the market and everyone else is leaving us in the dust. And I think this is a very important part of that. But enough about that. Let us start by welcoming our esteemed panelists. We have Haraldur Bjarnason. He is the CEO of Auðkenni, the federated eID provider in Iceland. He has worked with eID and e-signature developments for 2 decades, participating in various expert groups and European co-founded eID projects like Stork and Nobit. So then we have Bertie Avrey, I think it's correct, sorry.
Yeah.
She's a European project manager at Pole TES in Normandy, specialized in digital technologies. She's in charge of drafting roadmaps, providing guidelines and recommendations for the implementation and adaptation of technology solutions. She is also involved in Dynamo, D-I-H-N-A-M-O, the Norman EDIH, specialized in connected, safe and sustainable mobility. Then we have Búi Bjarmar Aðalsteinsson, service designer and digital leader of the Department of Services and Innovation at the City of Reykjavik. Búi is a social designer with experience in topics such as mapping the experiences of asylum-seeking children and job satisfaction and skills in the prison as a workplace. Then we have Inga Björk Margrétar Bjarnadóttir, disability rights specialist and doctorate student at the University of Iceland. She has received the Accessibility Award granted by the City of Reykjavik for her fight for digital inclusion. And we have Connor Fitzmaurice, Policy Officer at DG CNECT, the e-government and trust unit focusing on the implementation of the EU Digital Identity Wallet, which we heard from earlier. And we have Nicholas Martin, Senior Researcher at the Fraunhofer ISI. Nicholas's work mostly focuses on the impact and regulation of new technologies, as well as the policies to foster technology development and deployment. And let's just give a big hand to all these great guests. And to start with, I would like to give the panelists a brief chance to comment on the discussion and the presentations we have seen this morning, starting with Inga and moving down the line. Inga, go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me today. All the speakers were very intriguing, and what I maybe wanted to reflect on was Svits, I think, from Reykjavik, yeah, speak about the achievable roadmaps. And I've worked a lot with people implementing technology, and I've seen that very often I'm brought in as a accessibility specialist in the last step, the final step, when the product is finalized. And that's where I can see the lack of accessibility, the poor design, the overly complicated phrasings, and then it's too late for me to make any changes because it's too costly and too time-consuming. So I think it's very interesting to reflect on when do we bring the disabled community as stakeholders into the process. Is it in the version 2? Is it in the beginning of the process when we start implementing new technology, when we get the first idea? I think it's very important to bring these stakeholders in during the first day. What do you need? How can we make this accessible to you?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, super intriguing stuff. I think a reflection for me and what we've been dealing with is maybe also in relation to what Oscar was talking about, and that like we've heard a lot about tools and their potential, but as soon as you like, in order to use a tool to its fullest potential, you need understanding and education. And I think that has been our biggest challenge and continues to be a challenge, is that we educate people so that they fully trust electronic ideas. And like we have still examples of government agency asking us to print out electronically signed documents in order for them to document those decisions. So like, and I think this is just a matter of like having, like going the full mileage of introducing the ideology behind something being electronically authenticated and electronically signed, and what that means. Because like now we're in this first step of like educating the public of what it is, and we often take this like it's, you know, almost just like hand signing, but now we are stepping into the zone. It's like, well, it can be so much more than that. It can have much further implications in our lives, and also to kind of also, you know, what Inga is saying, that we need to be aware of all of our citizens. Because as municipalities and as a state, we cannot only service 95% of the public. We need to include everyone. So I think that's also like a big demand for us to always think, you know, in 100% services. Yeah.
Thank you, Búi. And Haraldur?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for offering me to join this panel today. I mean, there was some great well, stuff, as you said, that we went over this morning, and intriguing. I mean, this digital journey, at least here in Iceland and in Europe, it's a journey. It's an ongoing journey, and it takes time, and it's loads of stakeholders that kind of need to work together in building basically the society that we're in, and it's. And people like us from technology or from government, I mean, we are in this to service people. So, and we need to kind of be aware of that. The building the eID, I mean, because I mean, that's one of the focus points here on this meeting, is that, I mean, it's something that takes time, and it's taken, I mean, quite a long time here in Iceland. I mean, we've been, you know, doing this for. Yeah, since 2008, maybe, when we started this, and in the beginning, the eID wasn't really solving anything, because the services that were, you know, basically, you know, this was meant to be used for, they weren't there. So the value for people wasn't there. So people didn't understand really why they needed this thing. They were doing things in a different way. And this thing that we were proposing and trying to, you know, kind of involve and, you know, get out there to people, they didn't really see the value of it. And the services, their focus was kind of, in many ways, well, yeah, the value isn't really there because nobody has this eID thing. So, I mean, this is like a chicken egg thing. And this kind of battle took some time. So, you know, we could debate the ease of use and so on, what's really kind of the hinder. So these were the first challenges. But today, like here in Iceland, I mean, we have a majority of eIDs and people are using them. We have the majority of services. So we kind of, we are at that place. So we don't have those challenges anymore. But then we have other challenges and challenges that we really need to look at and take care of, and like inclusions that we talked about. Because everybody's focusing on digital ways of services, then inclusion is so important because people are kind of, well, being left out in that sense. So that's the challenges that we need to focus on and improve on in so many aspects, you know, around everything. So, yeah.
Thank you, Haraldur, and Mr. Fitzmaurice.
Thank you. Very happy to be here today. I must admit, I was about to talk about the chicken and egg problem myself, about when essentially you design an eID solution, but you don't have any public services, and it's very hard to essentially achieve that digital transformation because you need essentially the public services for users to come, and then vice versa, you need the public services are wondering where your users are. One thing maybe I would emphasize, because this is a similar journey, a lot of member states go along, or basically countries with their citizens when they design an eID scheme, is essentially considering both the key stakeholders, as was mentioned earlier. You want willing stakeholders, those areas or organizations that will push digitalization and work with you in a very constructive and collaborative manner. And then secondly, you need to focus where there is actual benefits from citizen. Personally, in my experience in Ireland, I'm from, we launched our eID scheme in 2016, and we had a lot of the problems, the same journey actually mentioned, Oscar talked to very well earlier, around essentially that digital transformation process. And similarly, it was a journey where you had to keep going. People would bring up essentially the things that even happened during the 90s as a reason not to do it. And that's always slightly frustrating to go back 20 years as a reason not to approach something. But you keep progressing incrementally, and essentially you get into a position where essentially you're delivering for the users. But a key thing is very much to focus on the benefits you can achieve for essentially the citizens as well as businesses, and just working with willing stakeholders, because once you get through the willing stakeholders, generally the others start coming, maybe slightly unwilling, but they'll get there in the end. The other point I would mention, just maybe on digital accessibility and inclusion, is that it's very important. I think it's been kind of touched upon when designing the services, that you need to make them very inclusive. However, one aspect that is not often considered is you always need to consider maybe the 5 to 10% of users who don't want to go digital, and that's something that some member states you need to be kind of cognizant of, because there's always reasons for that. It could be accessibility reasons, it could be just preference. Social-wise in Ireland, there's actually a number of services where people actually prefer to go in face-to-face because it's part of their social routine. They meet their friends when they go into the public office, they have a chat, they go off and have a coffee. So it's kind of part of their routine. So you need to consider essentially how you still support those alternative routes and then kind of maintain the inclusivity for all.
Thank you. And Ms. O'Reilly?
Yeah, so thank you for inviting me as being a panelist today. Thank you for inviting me yesterday, Kristun. And so I took some note, as you said. From my side, I do not come from the IT part. I really work on EU projects for digital solutions. And when I talk about my job to regular citizen in France, it's like, oui. and that's it. It's like, but what after is like, what is eID? What is that? So I really like the idea of like a journey. It's like it can be a really long journey, but in the end, like there is this positive outcomes for sure in this. And luckily with the project, so Impulse project, I've been traveling quite a lot and met different people, so from research part, from service providers in technology and other citizens. And there is a will to go more digital and to use this eID. And still, I like the face-to-face part, it's like people still need to meet each other, whatever culture that you have. But it could also facilitate, the eID could facilitate that as well as in traveling in Europe. So having this idea of a cross-border and not just use this as a regional or national, but really having this eID that for Europe. So that's what I've taken from today, is really having something as a European solution, just like also Impulse is doing, and yeah, that's my take on the day.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Martin?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation to be on the panel, and thanks especially to the our speakers beforehand for your really fellow panelists for your really interesting comments, and of course Kristrun for organizing everything. So I have a couple of thoughts about some of the things we've heard this morning. And I'll start, in fact, with Kristrun's comments right at the start, opening the session, where she remarked upon the importance and the value of keeping and understanding technology and technology development as something that remains open and contestable and open to revisions. And I think that is something that is, on the one hand, really important, and I think Inga Björk just also underscored that with the point about you, in developing technology, you need to be able to iterate and include and revise on the basis of the feedback you get from the really diverse user groups that you have. And at the same time, this stands in a clear and important tension, which I think we also have to be very aware of, which I think came out implicitly and importantly in the remarks of our final speaker, whose name I'm terribly sorry I've forgotten it, Oscar, from exactly Oscar's remarks from Reykjavik, where basically ultimately he underscored the point of, look, we need to build something and have it working and have it on offer, because citizens don't want to be constantly discussing things. Citizens want services that work without hassle, and that's the entire point of everything. So I think many IT projects, and in some ways sort of the ideology, if you want, of IT development finds itself in the somewhere on the spectrum between these two poles, and one of the challenges is to navigate between them and sort of find where is actually the sweet spot here for each project as you're going along. And that relates us back finally to the issue of European digital identity and the European eID wallet, and Connor's really interesting remarks on how that journey is kind of being planned. So there's somewhat critical question to the audience and the fellow panelists, and I'm afraid especially Connor, because in his form as representing the EU Commission, because listening to Connor describes the various steps that we're going through there. We're first developing technical specifications, then we're going to have these very large multi-year pilot projects to test this out. Then on that basis, we're revising the specifications to sort of develop a reference architecture. Then we've still not built the thing, actually, but then we're leaving it open for providers and member states to build and offer interoperable solutions. And there I'm left with a question, don't we need to do this much faster? And don't we need to maybe trial out a little bit less and just simply have something built and working and on offer, also if it's maybe not always perfect in all regards, simply because on the one hand, citizens expect things to be there on offer and working, and not only in 5 or 10 years. And secondly, of course, because the entire premise and the entire point of developing a European digital identity wallet is that we have something in Europe and we're not dependent on overseas technology providers. But they're, of course, not sleeping. They're developing things. Like, you probably all have wallets on your mobile phones by now. So, yeah, how do we square the circle?
Very
Enough
good.
comment.
Thank you very much. And now we will be opening up the floor to questions. I would like to ask the audience to bear in mind to direct your question to one or more of the panelists. Often when questions are asked to the whole panel, they tend to take a lot of time and get less focused. So I would suggest selecting 1 or 2 or 3 panelists to direct the questions to. Kristrún will be on the lookout for audience members with questions. And not to worry, I have a few backup questions here if things get a bit slow. But yes, are there any questions to our panelists from this esteemed audience?
Hello, Alicia again. I have a question for Inga. It's regarding, in your presentation now, you mentioned that it is not considered well the inclusion of disability people for digitalization. So you mentioned when will be the proper moment, but what do you have in mind will be the proper moment from your perspective? And also, this question, I will bring it also to the European Commission, how we can consider this group of population to have it into account also for digitalization in an European level. Thank you.
When I work with both municipalities and government bodies, I can often see that user testing is either not being done or being done at the last possible stage of the product being designed. It's not a diverse group. You have these young people who are technically literate, information literate, and so what I would suggest is we need laws, at least in Iceland, about and regulations about how the accessibility should be, what is the lowest bar of accessibility that we want, and we recommend, or that we need governmental and municipalities to follow. And I think you should start meeting with diverse groups from day one. And the stakeholders aren't only other municipalities, the people working in the welfare office. The stakeholders are also the users. So does this answer your question? Yeah.
On this as well.
Yes, go ahead.
So I'm pulling a little bit more on my kind of past experience, but this is also the kind of approach around the European Digital Identity Wallet. But frankly, in terms of user testing and also accessibility testing, if a project is properly managed, it should be there from the start. Accessibility by design, basically inclusion by design. Frankly, with a lot of IT projects, that alongside security by design, there are often things that are forgotten till, let's say, the last quarter. And then there's a rush to try and get them implemented. And generally what that ends or results in is basically a poor outcome. Usually it's, you've often heard about the government project that has very poor user experience because it was essentially they built the system but didn't think about that till maybe the last month or two. Same for security. You've probably heard about systems that weren't properly tested till the end, and then they find that they have a huge gaping hole. So frankly, it should be present from the start when you basically are planning and essentially setting out the roadmap from the project. It's accessibility, user experience, security. They're really key considerations that essentially if you're missing, then you're missing a whole lot that you should be considering. And that does involve, for usability, it involves engaging user experience experts as well as different groups. So you have a diverse range of stakeholders. On the security side, you should have security consultants, but also maybe independent, basically security tests, make sure that you're actually, it's not just a tick box exercise, let's say. And that's the same around accessibility. You should have independent checks, because then, again, make sure that's not just tick box where you kind of just say, yes, we're doing well, but it's only yourselves assessing you.
Thank you very much. Yes, go right ahead.
Yeah, just to add, I think it's also about mindset. Is that like we have so many instances of people making opinions that are not their own but on behalf of someone else. And I think this is especially prudent with children that like, of course you listen to the mother of a child, but you should be, like you should always ask the child as well. Because like, we think as parents, we know everything that our children needs and want and so on. But often that's just not the case. I have a teenager now, so like I'm getting a very hard lesson on this. But still, I think it's always a mindset that like everyone needs to be aware of. Like, am I stepping into the field of taking a decision that is, you know, on behalf of someone else? And if that's the case, you know, at least make a phone call. You know, I don't think it always needs to be so kind of, you know, hard-hitting and like within the processes, but also a mindset where we kind of remind ourselves and those around us that when you're taking a decision on behalf of someone else, you know, at least try to call someone if that's a possibility, because like one user is way better than none.
Yeah, thank you very much. Inka, would you like to add something to this?
Yeah, if I could add one thing. I just wanted to add a comment that, like, in this ableist world that we live in, people with disabilities are always seen as lacking, as like a faulty blueprint of a human being. So being disabled is always seen as that you're lacking something. It's not seen as a diversity, as having brown skin or green eyes. So I think that's also what we need to think about when we're implementing and developing technology. You are not making some special needs changes, you're just thinking of the group from the beginning. And we probably all know about the soap dispensers that don't work for brown skins, that don't start like when you put your hand under. It's the same for people with disabilities. We need to think about these groups as a part of society, just as with children, people with refugee backgrounds, homeless people, people with substance abuse issues. We need to think about all these people. And these are just not 5% of the community. We're always talking about the 95% of normal people, but we're much, much bigger than that.
Thank you. And at the risk of editorializing, I would like to add a little bit myself, because Inka brings up a very good point. And this has been a very pernicious cultural issue to tackle. Even with the best will, people tend to forget to do this, and that's not okay. And it's important to remember that even that you need to make sure that the eventual product is accessible to all who need to use it. And even in the edge case that you for some reason need to create a pilot program or proof of concept in which you can't implement accessibility at the like alpha or beta stages of development, you at least need to have had these discussions to make sure that when you are getting ready for the larger scale rollout, including the accessibility won't be an unforeseen problem that can't be worked into it. So this, even when you don't intend to include everything in that you would need, that you should, but if you need to do the pilot program without that, then you at least need to design it in a way where it isn't an obstacle. So yeah, let's move on to the next question. Any more from the audience?
I want to ask Niklaus Martin, what should be the role of private companies? This is kind of for Auðkenni used to be a private company, so I'm really happy to see that they now belong to the government and the city. But when we're dealing with this kind of stuff, should we be using Google Wallet and Facebook to organize the calendar of our schools, or should we try to do everything ourselves? I remember the Danish government actually paid to design a browser. They were going to compete with Google Chrome back in 2000 because they thought it was a necessary part of the future map. And they're obviously not doing that anymore. But how should we go the happy middle road here?
Wow, that's a Can I come back in 2 hours? So I'd break this down into maybe two core issues. Maybe let's say break it down into infrastructure provision on the one hand and service provision on the other. I think, at least if you're speaking about electronic identities and developing electronic identities, I think for service provision, sort of the wider ecosystem, you need to include the private sector, I think, very strongly from the start. And I think that projects which focus on building infrastructure exclusively with a view towards public service use cases are probably not always, but are likely to, or liable to run into a particular problem, namely simply that in our daily life, we use private sector services vastly more than public sector services. Simply because you know, there are not that many public sector services that I need all the time. I mean, there are a few I need, and they're very important, but I use them maybe 5 times a year. In fact, that's a number I have in my head from a number of different studies, sort of surveys. The average number of public sector services users seem to use in a year digitally runs somewhere between 3 and 6, seems to be a recurrent number. Elsewhere, maybe in Iceland, it's maybe higher. So if you are designing purely for the public sector, you're going to run into the problem that people are probably not going to be very, very slow to adopt it, simply because the hassle of switching to a new system for these things that you use very little is just not worth it. So that's about kind of including private sector service providers when you're thinking and building an ecosystem from the start. Now about infrastructure. Honestly, I don't have a very good answer to it, because I think the challenge is, on the one hand, that digital infrastructure has to meet pretty high quality requirements for people to want to use it, and pretty high quality requirements through a whole series of different dimensions. So it has to be usable, it has to have a really high security standard, and so on and so forth. And that is not something that in the past decades necessarily governments seem to have been universally good at providing. I mean, the list of failed or poorly conceived public sector digital infrastructure projects is fairly long, at least in Germany. Elsewhere, it may be better. On the other hand, of course, you do have the issue that if we are outsourcing key infrastructure provision to big private sector actors, especially ones who are not even headquartered in Europe or not even European companies, you really lose, in sort of in the extreme case, a degree of control, both over data flows and also simply over what is done. So I'm afraid I don't have a good answer. I think in less critical areas, I would say continue to basically rely on private sector, because you don't have too good an alternative often, but also look strategically to where are there pieces of this ecosystem, especially maybe strategically quite important pieces of the ecosystem, like say Oatkenny, which you may be able to then take into public ownership to give you a degree of control in the system. I think it's basically, I guess, you know, be sort of alive to trade-offs in both directions and somewhat opportunistic, as you, that I think would be my view. But what is yours?
I
I started thinking about this because of the eID. Let's try to avoid going back and forth, especially when we don't have the mic. But
sorry. Happily.
Are one of you trying to? Okay.
I can. I mean, one aspect. I mean, because we're talking about IDs basically, and a lot of this starts with basically, well, political will and legislation. If we look at, for example, passports or driving licenses, then we have legislations about that, and those legislations, they mandate and that environment, and within that environment, the government is responsible. So it's governmental issued IDs, like the passport. The government in each country issues those, and as well with the driving license, it could be municipalities, so different things. But within eIDAS, then that framework doesn't work that way. That is a framework set up that it's a trust service that anyone who wants to provide that trust service can provide, and it doesn't really, differentiate between government or private bodies and so on. So a majority of trust services, I think, in Europe are private companies. They're provided by private companies. And the setup is like that. And the trust system around that is that government has a role, and that is related to compliance, supervisions, and so on. So you have supervisory bodies in each country. They need to, they look at if compliance and so on. So that's the setup. So I mean, that's a political will that decided to go down this route with this eID or e-signature parts. And now we have eIDAS 2. And the pilots we were talking about, and actually we are starting to pilot something that hasn't been legislated yet. So it's a bit of a chicken egg thing. That, we're guessing how it's going to end, and we're building solutions and so on. So, but we'll see with the eID wallet if that's more of a step into the direction of government involvement, increased government involvement in the ID part of it. But this is just one way of doing it. The legislation or political will decides on certain structures.
Yeah. Maybe to just add one.
Christian, would you like? What were you trying to? Oh, okay, please, Mr. Martin, go right ahead then.
Give Connor first dibs.
Okay.
Just to add a little bit, because I think you covered the eIDAS content quite broadly, but it's interesting, the private sector inclusion point I wanted to pick up, because it is very important, because I think the point you make about basically the private sector is where you have the most interactions with on a daily or basis is quite true. For eIDAS 1, one of the big reasons it didn't really succeed was that it was focused basically solely on public services. And what that meant was that it had very limited use. And if you think of cross-border use of public services, that's even less. So essentially, there was very little return for the user. There wasn't a huge value for them to use these identity schemes when they could only use them in the context of public services. So that's why with the eIDAS 2 or the European Digital Identity Wallet, focus is now on the inclusion of private services as well, because then you get the benefits from increased interactions, while the private sector gets the benefits of leveraging essentially a national-based eID scheme that has quite significant identity assurances around it. The other point, just I think more broadly on the qualified trust service provider, there is and just the infrastructure aspect. So it varies between country to country. Some countries basically are the identities infrastructure is controlled by the public sector, and there's laws or restrictions around that, while others have public-private partnerships, and that tends to be that's a successful model in several countries. So both are possible. It depends more on a national level what they decide to do at a political.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Christian.
He's telling me I don't know how to use the microphone. Yeah, I do have a question for two of you actually right now.
Christian, can I just, sorry to interrupt, can I just finish a comment on the, unless your question was still to the same issue of role of the public and private sector?
No, I can wait.
Let's let him finish, but I would like to remind us that we do not have much time left, so let's try to be brief if we want to get in more questions.
I'll make it really quick, because I think one point here is important to consider. So I think we sometimes have a bit of an ideology of involving private sector at all costs. And I think I would approach it partly somewhat from the perspective of what sort of a market and what sort of a market structure do you expect and want to emerge afterwards? Because what I think you don't want, especially in an infrastructural context, is just a very, very fragmented landscape with a lot of different different providers. It confuses consumers. You have all sorts of problems with interoperability. So if that is what your opening and involvement of the private sector ultimately leads to, then probably this isn't actually increasing your efficiency on any level. The standard economic reasons for involving the private sector are likely to not really work. If you're basically looking, and I think with eID you often do move into that area, something of a more monopolistic structure, then you may consider going public to start with. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Kristrún, did you have questions?
Yes, I did. I'm actually looking at our little sheet here.
Yeah, I was going to move on to those, but...
Yeah, no, do you mind if I...
go right ahead.
I have one question for you, Connor, because I get the sense that this relationship between either authenticating yourself, which is a trust service, and then using services for which you need an authentication. You can think of them as two separate mutually agnostic entities, but there is clearly a relationship between the two. And so I was wondering from your talk about this relationship between authentication on the one hand and services on the other to users, that how much really is sort of in the European model. I'm a little bit asking you about how Europe is dealing with this. So service providers are those who eventually decide what kind of authentication is required to access your services. So is the intention or the assumption that those services out there, whatever they are, that they implicitly or explicitly simply need to trust the federated or the governed regulated trust services, and on the back of that, I'm just wondering if this sort of rollout and uptake that you are, expecting, anticipating, how much you're taking it for granted, really, or is there an issue, that issue approached, or how do you approach that particular issue?
Yeah, I can come in on both those. So in terms of approach, it isn't really taken for granted because the EIDAS one did not succeed in terms of the ambition of that regulation, which was essentially to have European citizens with eID means that were recognized throughout Europe. Basically only 14% of public services recognize that. So that's kind of why with the European Digital Identity Wallet and essentially the revision of the EIDAS regulation, there is these, normally what happens in a European legislative context is essentially the regulation is adopted, then there's about 2 to 3 years for it actually to come into force, and then the work actually begins during those 2 to 3 years to implement it. But usually what happens at that point is there's a realization that essentially what was set out in the regulation isn't necessarily achievable or has technical or service implications that actually act as barriers. So to be frank, it isn't really taken for granted, and that's why there is all this technical work ongoing right now to try and design something that is usable and essentially get feedback on it through the prototype or reference implementation and also the technical specifications. And then to ensure that there's actual user feedback, that's why there's this focus around these large-scale pilots, because without them, you'd be doing it in a vacuum. You'd be kind of designing something that you hope works, but you're not actually testing it before essentially you finalize the technical specifications or and the regulation is fully enforced. On your first part of your question in terms of them just having to accept, so that's kind of covered, and this is to get quite legal. There's under the EIDAS, there's this whole there's an implementing act which covers what are called levels of assurance. But essentially, levels of assurance are for identity assurance, how certain you can be in that person's identity. And essentially, it sets 3 levels: low, medium, and high, and kind of different requirements for those levels. But essentially, under the new EIDAS regulation, basically every member state is obliged to notify at least one eID scheme from their country, and it has to be certified at the level of assurance high, which is the highest level. So basically, that's a process where it's either peer reviewed by the other member states, or it's cybersecurity. There's a cybersecurity assessment by a competent body. And it has to be at that level. And that's kind of the guarantee, I suppose, around that identity assurance means. So another, essentially a service provider in Italy doesn't have to worry about, is this eID means we're encountering from France actually at the right level? They should be able to, essentially it's a published list of the eID schemes that go through that process and become what is called a notified eID scheme. So then that's listed, and that they don't really need to do checks, because basically there's national authorities as well as the Commission maintains the kind of governance over that. In terms of how it'll work with the European Digital Identity Wallet, essentially the onboarding experience, so you go to your mobile phone and you download the wallet that's made available by your member state. It could be one or it could be multiple, depending on how a country wants to approach it. But then essentially you onboard your identity into this wallet using basically a notified eID scheme, and then that basically loads your identity, and there's a guarantee that that wallet is yours, and it's kind of linked into the existing eID schemes that exist there. So it's quite a technical area, and it's still going.
Okay, now we are officially slightly over time. How are we for... if we wanted to maybe allow 1 or 2 more questions, how are we for that?
I'm actually myself really keen, if you don't mind, I'm really keen to ask the girls on the panel a follow-up on this. Is anybody else raised their hand?
I would like to see if anybody else in the audience has a burning question that must be asked. All right, as it seems not, I'll let you ask a follow-up.
Yeah, I'm just curious with all of this, because I'm still a bit fussy on this distinction, this agnostic relationship, mutually agnostic relationship between authentication and then a service. So 2 things. I want to ask Bertil first, and then you, Inga. When you're working with the Impulse project and you work with technology transfer practice, and you have to translate this into human language, what this is about, I'm just really curious in terms of authenticating yourself or using public service. What precisely is the target? What are you selling? What is the market? And what are you communicating that it is? I'm just sort of wondering if people are seeing this as the same thing that raises the same sort of issues across the board in terms of marketability, availability, accessibility, and viability as a product. And I mean, the same question, just from a different angle to you, Inga, is, are you facing the same sort of issues? Is this a one system really in the mind of a user, or do you distinguish and you have different kinds of problems with one compared with the other? So if you can, yeah.
So we'll go to Ms. O'Reilly first.
Yeah. So, well, for selling like the sales pitch that to translating that into human language, as you said, for any citizen, the easiest. What I learned too, it's that at the beginning I explained it as really going into details, and like when just Alicia mentions, like when we talk about blockchain, artificial intelligence, biometric authentication, then people tend to like be afraid. It's like they're a step behind. It's like this has to be. This has to be managed as well as going into something that they can already relate to. So as the Face ID that they have, or when you want to unlock your phone. So this is the same. It's just that we're trying to having it in a safer way that you can use it on your daily life for your service, and that you won't have all that many passwords that you currently have. So this is the trying to go to the easiest possible way to explain it. With that, you will be able to use public services in an easier way and a safer way. But it also depends on the culture that you're talking to other country. In France, for example, I still have my ID card and my driving license. My driving license is as huge as this. This is a piece of paper still, and there's no chip in it, nothing. So thinking about having it on my mobile is, so I would love to, but having it for many people, it's not even an idea. Same for the ID card. So going the eID is also the step before that needs to be explained. I think that the technology is there, but we should not just already mention the technology behind, but as just the solutions. As you say, Nicholas, is that this is a solution that is working. If you want to know what's behind, we're ready to explain, but for this like really easy, already ready solutions to. So that's the selling speech for is a ready solution to. Yeah.
Okay, and Ingabjörg?
So people with disabilities are a very diverse group of people, so it's hard to generalize, but I've worked mostly with people with intellectual disabilities, and I find that those who are granted electronic IDs find it very good to use because it's an easy login, and we all have problems with passwords. You know, either you try to keep them all in your mind or you use the vault, and you probably all have that friend that has been using the same password since grad school. But the issue is that many people are denied electronic IDs due to concerns about sole control. And this is a very difficult issue to navigate because of the EDIH and because of the conventions on the rights of people with disabilities and how we're going to navigate safety and security versus the right for assistance and the right for independence. And we know that many people are using electronic IDs with the help of relatives, elderly population, and just the general public. So I want to just leave a thought that we are placing judgment when we deny a person electronic IDs due to their disability, because we know that people who can sign their own name and can memorize a 4-digit PIN have been denied because of the sole control concerns. So that means that the provider is drawing the conclusion that based on the look of the person or the way they speak or behave, is enough to draw the conclusion that they will not be in sole control of their electronic ID. The businessman in the suit might just as well give his phone to his wife. You know, we don't know, and we don't make that judgment about him, or the 60-year-old woman, or the 20-year-old girl who doesn't want to deal with the technical things and just wants her boyfriend to do it. I'm not saying that we should decrease the security, but I'm just saying that we need to understand that this is not inherently rational decisions that we're making. We are making decisions based on ableist values, amongst other. This is completely off track, but I just really wanted to add this.
Can I add? Yes, go right ahead.
I think it's also super important that government asks itself, do we really need to authenticate here? Mm-hmm. Because one thing is that we trust electronic IDs, but then we need to ask ourselves, at what moment does it make sense to, do we really need to authenticate someone that is seeking a cultural support for a interesting project? Mm-hmm. You know, maybe at some point we need to see if it's false or some conspiracy to get all the money out of Reykjavik City. Another thing, but also like we can also let people quite far into the process without, you know, starting to ask for or having it necessary to have an electronic ID. So to kind of like provide as much service as possible without authentication, and also in turn for the, you know, city and the government to trust people, because like you need to also look at the worst case scenario, that in some instances you might be, you know, paying out funding or something to a minority that is a bad player in the system, but then provided that, you know, a big chunk of the population will have the possibility to get what they needed without having to go through the process of having an electronic ID. Just
I would like to end with one question, if we still have time for that. It's mostly for Mr. Fitzmaurice, but perhaps others could take an interest, and that's on cybersecurity, because an EU-based digital wallet with eIDs is obviously something that is very important and something that can have a lot of benefits, but one might also imagine that a lot of global players, very well-funded, very technologically capable, would see an interest in gaining access, manipulating, or even just disrupting such a wallet. Even nominally friendly foreign governments might see an interest in having access to it. So how secure is it possible to make this? And obviously, I don't want you to go into any compromising details, but like, what is being done to make sure that this is as secure as possible?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and to be honest, it is always kind of an arms race in the cybersecurity space to keep ahead of essentially new attack routes and stuff. I suppose for the European Digital Identity Wallet, we're exploring it basically from two angles. One is the design, and one is kind of essentially cybersecurity assessments. On the design side, it's essentially to make sure you don't make that juicy target. Essentially create a huge centralized database of personal data. So that's why. With the European Digital Identity Wallet, there's very much an emphasis of storing the data locally on the person's device. Now, that should be in a secure environment for sensitive data, and that's kind of an ongoing challenge because mobile phone OSs aren't actually the securest space. But the idea is, at a design level, not to create essentially this honeypot in the middle at a European level or in each member state of a lot of personal data, because they are always prone to attack and eventually breach, even with the best measures. It's kind of you're always fighting to keep them secure. In terms of an actual the wallet itself, essentially the EU has recently brought in legislation called the European Cybersecurity Act and created essentially a European Cybersecurity Center, and basically each member state is supposed to set up their own nationally. As I understand it. So for the European Digital Identity Wallet, that will be essentially assessed against a cybersecurity certification scheme that is developed for it. And essentially that's independently assessed, audited and tested with all sorts of attacks. And that's to kind of provide some sort of independent check of essentially the wallets that are issued by member states in the end to kind of provide some guarantee. And I think that's something that scheme would be regularly revisited depending as new attacks are developed and come about.
Thank you very much. So I think that's it. If there are no last-minute, very brief questions, I think we are well over our allotted time here. So, Kristrún, do you have anything to add?
No, I just want to thank everybody for.
Sorry. Just want to thank everyone for participating, and the speakers are gone, some of them, but I think this has been a splendid morning, and we've been in live streaming, so all of this material is going to be available, and I think that's important. And I think for Impulse, our partners are here visiting in Reykjavik, and I think this input to the Impulse project, I hope it is of some value for the project on the whole. To have organized together with EDIH in Iceland this event. And with that, I just say, have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you. And
fantastic.
Yes, with this, I think we should just end the panel and this event. Big thank you to all our panelists and to all our speakers, and of course to Kristrún for organizing and doing everything, basically holding this all together here today. But yes, thank you all very much, and big hand to all of you.